All right, Ian. Interesting article came out related by a friend of the show, Karen, who is also an author for both the NES and Super Nintendo guidebooks. That video game preservation was on the cover of this month's American Library Association magazine.
Yeah.
Very interesting article.
And it goes on to talk about, how, we hear about places like the Strong Museum doing video game preservation, and we hear about, National Video Game History
Foundation.
Yeah, Video Game History Foundation doing preservation. But libraries are starting to do, their part as well. And the article goes on to talk about how a lot of universities are doing it. The University of Michigan has more than 8,000 video games and 60 consoles dating back to, the 1970s. University of California, Santa Cruz's Science and Engineering Library has over 2,000 commercial games, 300 student games, 40 consoles, some as old as the 1985 Nintendo Entertainment System.
Whoa, that's an ancient system.
Look, I laugh at it, but it's getting to the point where
yeah.
we have to phrase it that way. I'm not getting any younger.
An old toaster oven.
And how they focus on the authenticity of the experience for people who are researching it. So as the article says, the objective is playability. And for instance, the University of California at Santa Cruz, the goal is to provide students with not only the game but also the console it was made for, a compatible controller, and an era-appropriate TV to play it on. And I do feel that, something like an era-appropriate TV to play a game on is a fairly important thing. When doing research on a game, especially if you want to talk about the visual appeal or the aesthetic, you can, do all sorts of upscaling. You can apply all sorts of filters. But if you want to talk about it in an authentic way, the device that you played it on is often, I think, just as important as, playing the game on the original hardware. Video games are, 50% what you see. It's not just what you're doing. So the visual fidelity of it, I think, is very important.
Sure. There's a reason why I didn't look at it this year, but every year Portland Retro Gaming Expo does their, late 70s, early 80s little living room setup with the shag carpet. They got an old console TV that was probably made sometime in the 70s, and they hook up the Atari and they put the couch there, and this is how you were if you were like in 1980.
Yeah, they usually have a couple of them. This year I think it was 3 or 4 of them, like in a cross pattern.
And the people are usually there. They're usually children. Mm-hmm. Children that think that the Atari was like the Model T, to us, thinking about cars, that they're trying it out. They're like, oh, this is interesting, because they're looking at their phone and they're like, this is how Grandpa and my great-grandfather played. Jesus Christ. This is how Grandpa, at this point it is Grandpa, played Atari, when he was 10 years old or 15 years old. And there's something to be said for that. There's a reason why when people say, "Oh, you need a CRT to play the NES," that's true. It does feel different. There's something that hits you differently. It's not just nostalgia. I'll disagree with some people. It's like, "Oh, it's all just nostalgia." No. There's a feeling. You interact with it differently. You're seeing something different. You just are.
Yeah.
The fuzziness. It's just a different experience. When they designed games back then, they weren't developing them for crystal clear LED TVs. They were designing the games how they looked on what the monitors they had, the TVs they had. That's just how and obviously how they sounded. Playing a crappy version of Pac-Man back then. I remember I still watch those old those old You Can't Do That on televisions. There was one episode dedicated to video games, and I remember them playing like Pac-Man. You hear the sounds in the background on TV. I'm like, wow, that's how you experienced video games back then. That's how teenagers played video games. So that if you want to put yourself in your shoes there, that's what you do. And that's what museums are. We talked this before about what video game museums should be. Should they be entire libraries of games? Probably not. It's nice to have them available, but no. They should be set up with displays and information and you feeling like what the experience was for that moment in time for video games. That's what a museum should provide you. It's a snapshot in time.
Right.
When you go to most museums, it's not like, here's every freaking artifact we found. No, here's a snapshot of how people lived, in their old huts. This is how they churn butter. Like, that's what a museum is. It gives you a feel for the experience at the time there.
So
someone's doing something with their jet ski out there.
So it talks about some of the potential or some of the problems they've encountered, though, copyright issues, etc. This from the article to me is particularly interesting. Potential copyright problems exist in every layer of video game collecting, especially regarding older materials with expired copyrights. In October 2018, a decision from the Library of Congress and U.S. Copyright Office allowed institutions to lawfully own copies of older video games if they were acquired from the original companies in order to make preservation copies. A separate challenge for librarians and archivists, as many companies are no longer in business or have discontinued server support. How the hell is that supposed to be viable? And that's insanely limiting. I mean, some of these fly-by-night companies, I mean, were gone a year after they released the game. How are you supposed to acquire this, legally under that rule, that law?
Well, to me, the bigger issue is like, how are you going to set up your servers to play games that no longer you can play because the servers are down.
Sure.
I know that they're trying to get those. Remember, we spoke about it a couple of years ago. They're trying to get those exceptions passed through, and they're having difficulty with that.
Right.
To have servers exist for like 20-year-old PC games that the servers aren't around anymore, so you can't play them. Things like that. Being able to play, a multiplayer Wii game, Mario Kart Wii, where they shut the servers down. Within 10 years of the game being out. How do we get around those issues for the future? That's to me a problem with this. But the good news is that obviously the more libraries do this, the more access people have to it, the more they learn about it, because as nice it is to have like the strong, most people will never get up there to visit them. They just won't.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean one, and you shouldn't have one institution handling everything. That's a very dangerous and bad idea. The strong's fantastic, but just for all sorts of reasons, you want as many places doing this, working together, hopefully, but you want as many places doing this as possible. Yeah,
universities, like I said, like certain libraries that can handle it. There's got to be a big library, probably. There's some public libraries that are huge. The one I used to go to in New Jersey, our main one was gigantic. It was like 3-4 floors and sprawling. So I picture them being something that they can probably get into something like this eventually. And it's good then if you have, sort of depositories throughout the U.S. for people that bring in their old stuff. If the libraries advertise it, instead of people throwing it out or even putting it on eBay and realize no one wants it, they can bring their old games to a library,
right,
and give it away the same way you do with books. That's actually not a terrible idea. And then more and more people learn about it, and it keeps it alive. I'm not talking about our generation. I'm talking about the kids that are now 4 and 5 years old. 20 years from now, that might want to know how, like I said, how Grandpa played, Nintendo games. Like, that's what we're thinking about here, because this stuff could die out easily. We take for granted, oh yeah, video games digital. That just preserves the code. That doesn't preserve how you play the damn things.
Right.
That to me is just as important.
It is
long term. So there you have it. Yeah, that's something ROMs doesn't take care of, or re-releasing, putting stuff on Internet Archive. It doesn't take care of that. You're not. Can you archive a CRT with me with a couple of joysticks? No, I don't think you can.
Well, there's lots of archivists who say digital archiving is not archiving. In as many instances as possible, you need the real materials, object,
the real consoles, the real way to play it. And of course, with the Vectrex, that you don't have a choice with the Vectrex. you gotta have that big bulky item down in front of you there.